have this light client and we're tracking headers and we know the root hash of each block, how are we actually using that to communicate between the two chains? So really, we're using this in conjunction with two different packages. ICS-24, which tells us kind of a standardized key path. I can go back to the diagram, ICS-24, which will give us a standardized key path for each part of IBC that we're using to communicate, and the proof package, ICS-23, which does the actual Merkle proofs verification. So ICS-24 tells us is a standardized agreement between everyone who speaks IBC on where we're storing particular information in our blockchains. So if you look at something like packet, for example, how do I just take a root hash and know that a packet has been committed? Well, given a port ID, channel ID, and a sequence, I know exactly the key path that the counterparty chain is supposed to store the packet in. So I can take this key path and prove, okay, the reader will say, hey, I have packet 4 on port ID transfer channel 1. And in order to prove that, you have to show me that the counterparty had stored this particular packet you're giving me under this packet path, which is, let's see, it's a packet prefix along with the channel path and key sequence prefix. It doesn't really matter, but the point is there's a standardized path for every single thing that we need to prove in IBC. And so if you're trying to prove that the counterparty has sent me a packet, you have to prove that they've stored it under this path. If you're trying to show me that they've sent an acknowledgement, you have to prove to me that they've sent it in this standardized acknowledgement. They've set it in this standardized acknowledgement path. So the way we actually send information is that channel A is not actually like directly beaming something to channel. Chain A is not actually sending something directly to chain B, right? Chain A is storing in its own state machine the packet at a predefined path, and then chain B is verifying that that packet exists at that predefined path. And that's how they communicate back and forth. Does that make sense? Cool. So if we look at something like 07 client, so let's not look at verified compliance rate because that happens in a kind of handshake step that maybe not too many of you are familiar with, but let's look at the packet, right? Because that's kind of, I mean, everyone probably knows that IBC works by sending packets back and forth. So how do we actually verify that chain B has sent a packet? Well, we're passed in, a height, a proof height that the reader has given us, the proof itself, and the port ID, the channel ID, the sequence, and then the commitment bytes, what they've actually stored in their, what the relayer is actually claiming is being stored on chain B. So given the height, we can get the consensus state that we have stored for it. And in order for this proof to even pass, we actually need the consensus state already stored in our store. So that's why relayers, when they send a packet, they'll also send an update client for the height that they're proving. And that ensures that the client will have the consensus state when they verify the packet. And then we take the proof and unmarshal it into a Merkle proof. We don't need to worry about the delay period. Then the rest of it is really just quite simple. We take the Merkle proof and verify that the commitment bytes were included in the consensus states root, given the particular path that we already know should exist for that port ID, channel ID, and sequence. So we have kind of a root hash. Given a port ID, channel ID sequence, we know what key it needs to be stored under. and then we have the value, which is the commitment bytes. You'll see here there's something called client state.proof specs. This is the client state telling you what the structure of the Merkle proof is. Because there might be many types of different Merkle trees. Before I go further, do people here know what a Merkle tree is? Should I go into that very briefly? Cool, I can just do that very quickly. So as I said, each header has the app hash, and that app hash is a Merkleized commitment of the entire state. And so the state machine of a blockchain might have all these data blocks stored as leaves on a tree, and then we continually hash them at each parent node until we get to a root hash. And the benefit of this is that we can make very succinct proofs that something was included in state by taking L2 and then showing that if we provide the neighbors, the consecutive neighbors, in this case hash 0, 0 and hash 1, we can hash those all together and get back to the root hash. And that's how we prove that L2 existed. And so that's the same thing we do here. We have, again, this consensus state root, which acts as the top hash of this tree. The proof, the Merkle proof, is these neighboring hashes that are provided, and the commitment bytes are the value. And so the proof specs is, again, kind of giving you the structure. In the case of SDK chains, each individual module is an IAVL tree, and then those IAVL trees hash to a root hash, and then the root hashes of each IAVL tree are hashed as a simple Merkle tree to create the final root. So for us on an SDK chain, the proof specs are actually like a simple Merkle proof spec with a IAVL proof spec. You can think of it as a blueprint that we give to ICS-23 and say, okay, here's how you construct the proof for this client. And different clients can have different proof specs, or different chains can have different proof specs, depending on how they Merkleize their state. Are there questions here? I think I talked a lot.
Can you repeat what the commitment bytes are, or how they're generated?
The commitment bytes are, so when we store a packet, we don't actually, this is kind of something we'll get to when we talk about channels, but I'll just say it here. We don't actually store the entire packet in IBC because we want to, again, save on state. We only store the hash of the packet in state. So when the reader gives us the packet, they're giving it to us at the top of this hierarchy at channels, and when we're talking about receive packet, they give us the packet here. It goes down down through the connection and to the client, and the client only gets the hash of the packet because that's all it needs to prove. And it proves that under the standardized key path, and then tells the channel, yep, this was proven. And then the channel then takes the entire packet data which it has and sends it to the application, which will do whatever it wants with it.
In the example hash tree that you showed, so for example, if L2, would that be the transaction with the packets that the chain wants to send in the example that you were talking about?
Yeah, so in this case, L2, so this path would be a key path towards, which would be the key path that we expect here. This path, right, that is defined by ICS-24, the packet commitment path. And L2 would be just the hash of the packet would be stored here.
Mm-hmm. So the path is what you showed with the port, channel, and sequence number, is that?
Yes, yeah. It's that plus a prefix, technically, because we allow ICS-24 standardizes the kind of key path, but we allow clients to choose a prefix that they want to put in front of that standardized key path if they so choose. So in SDK chains, it's prefixed by IBC. So it'll be IBC / the key path. This is kind of diving into how SDK proofs are created, but the IBC key corresponds to the top level proof, and the ICS-24 key, the packet commitment path, that corresponds to the second layer proof. In SDK chains, a Merkle proof of something in state is actually a proof of a proof. We have the IVL proof and then the simple tree proof. The prefix is the simple tree proof in the SDK chain.
So is the client state proof specs, that's how the aunts and uncles are determined to verify the commitment bytes?
That's passed in. The aunts and uncles of the tree are passed in by the relayer.
Okay.
Yeah, the proof. And so if you look at the scala draw here, when we send a packet, we will query the full, as I said before, in an off-chain light client. Even if I'm running a light client just on my laptop, I connect to a full node. And if I ask for some information, let's say I want to know, what my account balance is, right? I can ask the full node for an account balance, and it'll give me, my account balance as a key and value. Here's your account key, here's the value of your account, and it'll give me a proof of that key value in the Merkle tree. And then all I have as the light client is this top hash. I just have this top hash. And the full node will give me all the aunts and uncles along with the actual leaf itself. And I can use the leaf and the aunt and uncles to hash it up to the root hash. And if it does hash up to the root hash, I'm like, okay, that is my account at this height at least, right? I can be sure that that's my account at this height. And the same thing happens for IBC. What's stored on state is just these top hashes, the root hashes, which we get from our headers. They're the app hashes and the headers. And the relayers, what they do is they query the full node of the counterparty chain. So if they're trying to send something to chain A, they'll query the full node of chain B and get the Merkle proof for that key value as well. So they'll say, please give me the packet at, sequence 7, and also give me the Merkle proof. And they'll package that in a receive packet message and send it off to chain A. And chain A will take the packet. It'll say, first, I need to prove this. It'll send the proof down to the clients, which will prove it up to, a consensus state that it has. And if the proof checks out, the packet will proceed to get processed.
So do I understand correctly that the root hash, is it like the hash of the state of the whole chain, or is it like the hash only for the IBC part of the key path?
Good question. So the root is the hash of the whole chain, because that's what you have in your header, right? The tenement header doesn't know that there's an IBC store or anything. The tenement header just knows that there's a root hash for the entire application, right? And so what the proof does is first it proves, as I said, it's a proof of proofs in an SDK chain at least. And so it'll first prove, hey, this packet was included in the IBC store. And then it'll prove, hey, this IBC store root hash is included in the final root hash. And so by doing that, you show that the leaf was included in the meta tree that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All good questions. Does anyone else have questions about these proofs? And so I just showed you packet commitment, but there is a verify function in the client state for every single thing we need to prove exists on the counterparty. So when we're talking about packets, it's packet commitments, acknowledgements. We even have a verifying the non-membership of something. If we want to prove that at a certain height, this particular key value didn't exist on the counterparty. We have that for packet receipts, which we use for timeouts. So that's, yeah. Packet commitments, acknowledgements, timeouts, that's for kind of the packet logic, but we also need to prove things when we're setting up handshakes, and that's, also needs to be verified. So verifying the channel state is a particular thing, verifying connection state, verifying client state, verifying the client consensus state. All these have their own, verify functions, which work, all of them work the same way. For each thing we want to prove, there's a standardized key path that IBC ensures is where, the counterparty is going to store it if they're following the IBC protocol. And we just verify that for a particular consensus state, the value we got was at the key we expect.